Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Isabella of France. Back in 1313, Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, made a gift for a group of noblewomen that her brothers were marrying. She gifted the three women these embroidered purses, and as it turns out, these gifts would soon lead to their demise. Basically, the following year after giving these gifts, Isabella spotted two of these purses in the possession of a pair of knights. Can probably already see where this is going, but of course Isabella was suspicious of this now, so she passed on the information to her father. From here, he had people watch the wives of his sons as a sort of investigation. Soon, two of the wives were found guilty of adultery with the knights, and it was discovered that an old guard tower acted as their secret meeting place. The women were placed into prison for the rest of their lives, and the men met gruesome fates that ensured they paid for their disloyalty. This had lasting repercussions, however, because with their wives in prison, the king's sons now didn't produce any male heirs before they passed away, and thus the 100 Years' War was born when the son of Isabella, Edward III of England, attempted to claim the French throne. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Prince of Brunei. Brunei's prince, Geoffrey Bolkiah, is the brother to the Sultan, and a few years ago he found himself in quite the scandal. Basically, in 1997, Shannon Marketic accused the prince and the Sultan of flying her and many others to Brunei under false pretenses. In this scandal, everyone escaped any kind of charges due to diplomatic immunity. Then we moved to 2000, where the Sultan himself sued his brother for apparently embezzling $14.8 million from the Brunei Investment Agency, which is in charge of things like their oil revenues. While he denies the charges, he agreed to hand over a number of his personal belongings to the government in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution and being allowed to stay at his residence. This was quite messy for the outwardly luxurious prince, but since then, it doesn't seem as though any major scandals have come to light, and the Sultan remains one of the last absolute monarchs in the world. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ferdinand I. The King of Naples from 1458 to 1494, Ferdinand was looked on quite fairly as a leader, but he was also known for being quite a ruthless leader in a lot of aspects as well. He was 35 years old when he came into power, and in 1485 he was faced with a revolt among the nobility. Ferdinand quickly put a stop to this, but promised the nobility a general amnesty before later turning against them and executing a number of them. For the most significant offenders against Ferdinand, however, he had quite a specific treatment for them. After their slaying, the king would have these enemies embalmed, dressed, and then posed in his quote black museum. This seems like a weird hobby you probably would want to keep hidden, but not Ferdinand. He loved it and was so proud of it. He would even take his guests on a tour of the place if he suspected that they may be treacherous. In our number 7 spot today, we have Louis XIV. During the reign of Louis XIV, poison was one of those things you just really had to worry about. It was on the rise as an easy and sneaky way to take people out and change the course of inheritance and influence. Because of the worries surrounding possible poisonings and stories of people close to the king doing some shady stuff, investigations began. It was soon found out that the king's chief mistress, the Marquis de Montespan, was said to be quite the client of Catherine Monvoisin. Catherine was a Parisian salesperson who sold powders and potions that were meant to catch the attention of the king. You know, love potion stuff. But among these love potion stories were also stories of horrifying rituals and rites of practice in order to get these alleged powers. These stories, of course, terrified the king, and this led to him ordering for Catherine to be burned at the stake, and not only this, but hundreds of others were implicated as well. Some passed from the conditions they were being held under, others were executed, and some saw punishments that spared their lives, but their reputations were forever tarnished. For the chief mistress, however, well, although she was connected to this entire ordeal, she was the mother of several of the king's children, and because of this close connection to the king, she wasn't arrested or tried. Instead, though, she was retired and sent to a convent to live the rest of her life. In our number 6 spot today, we have Sophia Dorothea. Daughter of the Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, she was betrothed to her first cousin, George. Now, history says that George wasn't the most attractive man with the nickname Pig Snout, but George was in quite a position where he was potentially the heir to 2 thrones, so of course the Duke agreed to hand his daughter over in hopes of her securing a crown. Princess Sophia obviously did not like this and apparently fainted when she heard of the betrothal in 1682. The marriage did go through, but things went downhill quite quickly and turned very violent. Flash forward to the time when Count von Königsmarck arrived from Sweden, and suddenly Sophia had a new interest. Not long after his arrival, the pair were having quite the affair that wasn't exactly as discreet as you might might have assumed. The pair made a plan to run away together and make a new life far, far away from Pig Snout. Unfortunately, however, the night before the pair were supposed to run off, the Count just disappeared. There are plenty of theories of what might have happened to the Count, including a jealous former lover and of course George. In the end, the rumors were swirling and George was super mad about it, so he divorced Sophia, took the kids and sent her to be imprisoned in a small castle on the lake. In the end, George went on to become King George I of England and he left Sophia behind.
A lesson in theft, the strawberry tiara. Why theft? Because a lot of these stolen jewels are the cursed ones, and it's not clear where the curse of the Hesse Darmstadt comes from, but the court jeweler points to the strawberry tiara as the culprit. The tiara was designed by Prince Albert, husband of Britain's Queen Victoria, for their daughter Princess Alice to wear on her wedding day. But before he could see her walk down the aisle in it, Albert died of typhoid fever at 42. Alice wore the tiara at her wedding and brought it to Hesse, where exactly 17 years later to the day of her father dying of the disease, Alice died of typhoid, but not before watching one of her daughters suffer and die of it as well. Alice, like Victoria, carried the gene for hemophilia, and through her daughters, Alice passed it on to the Spanish and royal families with tragic results. Perhaps none of that was down to a curse on the strawberry tiara, but then in 1937, 5 members of the Hesse-Ducal family were flying in a relative's wedding when the plane crashed while they were trying to make an emergency landing. Everyone on board was killed and the strawberry tiara was recovered from the wreckage in one piece. This time, a curse waits 10 generations. Nepal had become a sovereign nation in the 1700s, ruled by Prithvi Narayan Shah, and there are 2 stories for how he became cursed. Both begin with him coming across a supposed hermit. Either what the hermit offers the king food, which he refuses, or the king offers the hermit a bowl of curd, which he eats and then tries to exorcist vomit on the king, who obviously moves out of the line of fire. Either way, the hermit is actually revealed to be the god Gorakhnath, and he was pissed. So, King Shah is told his line would fall after 10 generations. Horrifically, on June 1st, 2001, the then King Nepal Biryendra Bir Bikram Shah Dev and most of his family were together in their palace. For reasons that are still not clear, the Prince Dipendra, the king's son and heir, entered the room loaded with weapons and killed 9 people, including his father, mother, brother, and sister. Dipendra then tried to take his own life and ended up in a coma for 2 days, during which, because of how monarchies work, he was officially Nepal's king by default. Dipendra then dies and the crown is passed to Birendra's brother before Nepal ended its monarchy in 2008. It lasted exactly 10 generations. How a curse of twins led to Zulu defeat? Maybe. The Zulu people had a belief that twins were cursed, and Makabi and her sister Mamana were allowed to live because their father, King Jama, who loved his precious daughters too much, he just couldn't fulfill that obligation. His subjects were not impressed and proceeded to blame everything bad that happened to the Zulu on the curse the sisters carried by being alive. They even blamed them when their own mother died, which was bad news for the clan, seeing as she hadn't provided a male heir before her soul's departure. Makabe continued to buck tradition. When her father died, she became regent for the young half-brother that she had, even though no woman had ever held that position before. The Zulu called her a bloodthirsty despot, but she did step down voluntarily when her brother was old enough. 20 years later, his son, Shaka Zulu, Mayabaki's nephew, would ascend to the throne. Shaka was both a very successful king and a very, very, very violent person. He had a thing for killing his own people by the thousands for no reason. So, Mugabe, she arranged for his brothers to kill him. As he died, legend said he cursed the Zulu. "You will never rule this land. It will be ruled by the sparrows, who will fly across the sea and build their nests high on the cliffs." It's said this curse brought the oppressive white invaders that overthrew the next king, and the curse of Mabake led to the curse of Shaka, which led to the defeat of the Zulu. If she'd shown mercy, perhaps she'd be spared. Death of 3. "Just as you have fired, in the same way one day you too will be killed," said Swami Kapatri on the 7th of November 1966. Since 1965, millions of saints in India had started a huge movement to enact laws on cow killings and cow protection. Indira Gandhi promised to do this as a prime minister and received blessings from the Hindu saint Kapatri. She never did though. So on November 7th of 1966, Gopashtami, the most sacred day for worshipping a cow as per Hindu calendar, a huge crowd of Hindu saints and Garashkas staged a peace protest in front of Parliament to demand a ban ban on cow slaughter and were attacked by the police force, resulting in the death of 5,000 plus Hindus. Indira Gandhi's government deployed an estimated 5,000 buses and trucks to remove any eyewitnesses, refusing to shoulder any responsibility for the attack and blaming it on the Home Minister. This is when Karpatri, devastated, curses her to die the same way she let the Hindus die that day. True to his word, Indira Gandhi is killed by her own bodyguards, the exact same way. And now, I hope you are ready for some curses on curses on curses. Pelops, he's going to marry the princess. He offers a servant a night with her if he helps kill the king. Naturally, it's a total double cross, and once the king is dead, the servant is ordered to be executed by Pelops. So, this basic ass servant curses Pelops' entire family and even backdates the curse to splinter reality. Tantalus questions the Olympics god's powers and kills his son, King Pelops, and feeds him to the gods while saying it's ox. The gods go, no it's not, and then he's the one cursed to stand in a puddle and he can't drink it, and then he's under the fruit he can't eat forever in the underworld, thus the word tantalize. Third generation, Pelops had two sons, Atreus and Thyestes, who then kill their half-bro so they don't gotta share the kingdom with them. Thyestes starts sneaking off with Atreus' wife, so Atreus cooks his sons and feeds them to Thyestes. What is with this family doing that? Atreus himself fathered two sons before he was killed, named Agamemnon and Menelaus. They married Clytemnestra and Helen, who gets kidnapped and causes the Troy War. On the way there, Agames talks crap about Athena, who stops the wind and strands them at sea. Only answer, Agames has to sacrifice his daughter. He does so to the horror of his wife, and the wind returns and takes them to Troy where they win the war. Oracle concubine Cassandra, cursed by Apollo for not wanting to bang him, foretells his wife Clyte will smoke Agam for this, which she 100% does. Then Cassandra dies too, as foretold. Agam's son, Orestes, comes home to his sister Electra, now the sixth generation of the curse. Persuaded to avenge their father, he commits the horrible Greek crime of matricide and is so shunned by everyone he starts being tormented by fury demons. Within the day of her mother's death, she learns her betrothed took his life, so Electra does the same. Orestes is now completely alone, praying to Apollo. The god suggests, hey, take it to Athena for intervention. They put on the first trial in history in Athens. The jury voted. 5 voted guilty, 5 voted innocent. Athena broke the tie in Orestes' favor, and with that result, it seems the curse is now done. Orestes returns home to his kingdom to take his father's throne. However, he never marries and has no living family, so the curse of the House of Atreus ended with him, even if Athena hadn't sided with him.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Princess Diana. We'll start with a tragedy right off the gate. Here we go. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, he straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla right before his divorce from his first wife, Princess Diana. So, in turn, Princess Diana addressed that relationship and what exactly happened. During that famous 1995 interview with BBC, she couldn't have said it better if I'm being honest myself. Diana said, very confidently, well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. That's a Princess Diana roast, folks. Oh no! Yeah, Princess Diana, she's full of roasts apparently. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was a little busy, it seemed, and rightfully so. Diana's like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with this guy. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only a year before her tragic accident took her life. Later in 2005, he married Camilla. Yeah, has anybody seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looks great in that movie, and I want to know if it's worth the watch. Comment down below. Number 9, The Great Fire. One of the most wild Nostradamus predictions of all time. It reads, the blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6th. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed. Now, there are of course many people who believe that this entry here was actually one that predicted the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. The line 23's the 6th and times 20 by 3, and then you add 6, you get 66. Right? Quick math. But most importantly, it may also mention London and the royal family. And in real life, this fire did affect them as well. Also, it is said by many that the reference to the lady here is another term for the kingdom, the lady. This means that Nostradamus was predicting, maybe, that the kingdom was going to fall as a result of the Great Fire. So, yeah, he kind of nailed it. I don't know. Number 8, King James. Not to be confused with LeBron James, although he's a pretty good king as well. He's alright, that fellow. This is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. don't do it or else you're a sinner, I guess. Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth of the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood. First of all, what? What did you just say? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles, like it's a Harry Potter spell? You know what I mean? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor is like, yes, just a flower petal, we'll fix that. Doctor with one of these comes in? No way, not listening to that guy. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV, apparently he never took a bath. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by walking by them. He would walk by and they'd be like, ugh. Guy's got Steven Tyler's hair. What is that? Like, can we cut it if it's infected with gross? Can we just, maybe a bald king? How does a bald king sound? Number 7, King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. These royals, they like to collect things, they like to spend their money on weird things. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. See, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep, my friends. He also collected human artifacts, this royal, so that's a bit odd to collect when you're a royal. Imagine having company over, you're like, yeah, watch the lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Do you want a drink? Let me get you a drink. King Rudolph II, okay, he's quite important in history, obviously. He supported the scientific revolution a lot, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff. Number 6, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube doesn't like when I say some words, specifically a word that rhymes with Yahtzee. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, I have to mention it. The Duke was also referred to as a bad boy, but just how deep did these incidents cut? Was he like topless on a beach and he's bad, or was he dressed up as something horrible at a Halloween party? It was the latter. Before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from that party. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. Did he dress up like a witch? No, it would have been fun, but no. Photos leaked of him wearing a World War II German soldier outfit. Can't say much here, but it was even equipped with a specific armband. Yeah, we can't show you either, but you get what I'm saying. This was a not great time. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way. He's a royal, and he does this instead. I don't know, it's very off-putting. Harry said afterwards, quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone," end quote. Wow, he really meant that one. Really came from the heart, that apology. It was a poor choice of costume, and I apologize, he says. Okay.
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals, obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes, but just won't admit.
Number 2. Stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know about the queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution, and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
Number 10 in our countdown is Julia Get a Grip Agrippina. When the Emperor Claudius's wife, Melissina, became entangled in an adultery scandal, the power position of the Roman Empress was suddenly wide open in the year 49. Julia Agrippina, exiled for a conspiracy against her first husband and widowed from her second that she was believed to have poisoned, concocted a scheme. In an outrageous maneuver, she seduced her own uncle Claudius to become his 4th wife. She didn't stop there, however. She then had her uncle husband make the son she had had in her prior marriage, Nero, his heir by marrying him to his own daughter from his previous marriage. Whew, now that's quite a family tree. Taking the title Augusta, she maintained a stronghold over political and household affairs, considering herself a co-ruler to her husband. After Claudius died from eating poisoned food, which is how her prior husband died, so make the connection there, Nero became a Roman emperor and would forever change Roman history in his time of rule. However, Agrippina could only hover above her son for so long, and his annoyance of her invasiveness grew. Nero chose to assassinate his mother with a trap, a boat set forth on the Bay of Naples designed to sink. But when it did, she swam ashore. Nero changed his plans and had his soldiers invade her summer home to do the deed instead. Number 9 in our countdown may be one of our most badass queens, Empress Theodora, from street busker to top dog. Syrian-born Theodora starts her journey as an actress, dancer, and mime alongside her 2 sisters in the late 400s, something she abandons by age 16 to be a mistress to a Syrian official, and she travels much of North Africa with him before his maltreatment and temper made her settle down in Egypt alone, where she took up wool spinning. It was here she met Emperor Justinian, and the two fell in love, and after Justinian changed some laws so that they could marry, they began co-ruling the Byzantine Empire together. So, what made her mad, you may ask? Her ideals and the smearing that they led to through history. She was historically known for supporting religious freedoms, women's rights, and the education of the masses. Her decisions, which reflected her opinions, led to the Nicaea riots of Constantinople. She intervened and was able to persuade her husband to stay. The two successfully quelled the revolt, and and in turn, she made Constantinople one of the most sophisticated cities in the world and promoted women's equity. Theodora's name appears in almost all the legislation passed during the period, and she received foreign envoys and correspondence with foreign rulers. Her husband died in 1527 AD, and Theodora took sole control of the Roman Empire. Under her reign, bridges, aqueducts, and churches were built. Theodora died of cancer on June 28, 548 AD. She and Justinian are both considered saints by the Eastern Orthodox Church. The She-Wolf of France is in number 8 of our countdown. Her actual name is Queen Isabella of England, and she was famously married to the closeted Edward II. Acting as a beard to someone who doesn't love you would be hard enough, but the two did also have to produce heirs together. One would be the future King Edward III. Queen Isabella was in a desolate and lonely situation, especially as her husband's two male suitors, Piers Gaveston, who he gifted her jewels to, and Hugh Despenser, who was a wildly hated extortionist, were always his preferred company. So she rounded up some spiteful nobles, first killing Gaveston by beheading, and then driving Despenser from the country and redistributing his wealth. King Edward unsurprisingly was upset and sieged against those who had contributed to the death and exile of his lovers, all whilst his wife took cover in the Tower of London. It's here she met exiled British traitor Lord Roger Mortimer and started her own affair. She had him broken out and sent to France, where she later joined him and with her son, and then sent Edward a letter that essentially said, "Suck it." The anger at having been cast aside turned into burning desire for vengeance as Isabella invaded England with her new husband and army and usurped the throne, where she and Mortimer then ruled until her son came of age and had her dethroned for her violent tendencies. She died 28 years later in retirement, and Edward III later went on to rule England for 50 remarkable years. Maria the Mad comes in at number 7 of our countdown. She was just 16 years old when she became the Princess of Brazil and the Duchess of Braganza, then their queen following the passing of her father. Brazil changed from just a Portuguese colony to a large kingdom. Brazil, the Algarves, and the United Kingdom of Portugal are 3 famous formations recorded under Maria the Mad and her son. After the death of the queen's husband/uncle in 1786, however, there was a noticeable decline in her mental health. 1788 saw the passing of her daughter, newborn son, and her closest confidant. By 1792, after the passing of her eldest son a year prior, Maria seemed to be experiencing combined symptoms of hallucinations, depression, and anxiety, all resulting from mass traumatic losses. It evolved to later include religious mania and melancholia. She started avoiding court gatherings and social or royal obligation. It was then her treatment went to Dr. Francis Willis, who tried straitjacketing, blistering, and ice baths, none of which were helpful for obvious reasons. After treatment for more than 5 years, he declared the disease was incurable. By 1792, Maria was no longer a capable ruler and deemed insane. Courts pushed her son John to take over the government ruling, but he delayed until he finally took the throne in 1799 for a truly tragic reason. There was just no longer any possibility that his mother would ever recover her senses. If the nickname Maria the Mad wasn't already taken, then this next Maria named monarch would have snatched it up. In at number 6 is Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. Maria Eleonora was born in 1599 to Prince of Brandenburg and Anna, Duchess of Prussia. She grew up pampered, and Maria Eleonora was the it girl of the 17th century. All powerful monarchs fell over themselves to marry her. While she was dismissive of the 22-year-old Swedish king Gustav Adolphus initially, in 1620 she changed her tune as she'd apparently fallen in love with him practically overnight. And so they were married. With the king so frequently risking his life in battle, it became imperative that his wife produce a male heir, so Maria had to hanker down and focus on the baby-making business. Maria experienced 3 stillborn children consecutively before the successful birth of her daughter in 1626. It was a rare break in battle, so her husband was there to excitedly greet his daughter. Maria, however, had a very different response. Her baby was born with the condition fleece lanugo, a condition where hair covers the body of a newborn. Her infant was enveloped from its head to its knees, leaving only its face, arms, and lower legs visible. Maria was horrified, claiming to have birthed a demon, and rejected her daughter for the decade to come, even after losing her husband in 1632 Battle of Lutzen. And while everyone mourns their own way, it's easy to say Maria really took it up a notch. She forced their daughter to sleep in blacked out rooms and reportedly hung King Gustav's heart in a golden casket on the ceiling above the bed, making the girl sleep directly under her father's blessed remains. In 1633, Maria Eleonora returned to Sweden with her beloved's embalmed body. She refused to bury Gustav for more than a year, reportedly embracing and caressing the decomposing king. Maria's story continues to become more demented with time, and her daughter grows to become her caretaker, especially when troublesome Maria runs away to Denmark permanently, and her daughter's left to become the queen and pay her mom's allowance to Danish royals. Awkward. Modern day monarchy wouldn't be complete without a tax fraud family. 2014, the dubbed philandering playboy king, King Juan Carlos of Spain, found his popularity plummeting. His initial ascension to throne in 1975 had been wondrous, but now following reports of his messy affair and exuberantly lavish lifestyle in the midst of Spain's economic collapse, he abdicated the throne in favor of his son Felipe. His daughter Infanta Cristina stirs the pot, charged with tax fraud in 2014. Although she was acquitted in 2017, she was stripped of her title and left Spain for Switzerland. But it was her husband's turn, I guess, because the former handball champion was convicted on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion and sent to prison in 2018. Since then, Spanish prosecutors launched 3 separate investigations into the former king over allegations including corruption, money laundering, credit card fraud, and kickbacks, though all were dismissed earlier this year due to insufficient evidence, the statute of limitations, and of course the monarch's constitutional immunity. In a recent case, Seguin Buistin has sued him for using Spain's spy agency to threaten her, and in 2020 he was stripped of a Spanish stipend and went into self-exiled in the UAE. First, the great-grandmother, an imprisoned princess. Starting in 1682, Princess Sophia Dorothea of Saly married the basic B-word George of Hanover. She didn't like him, his stupid court, or the mistress that dominated his life, so in 91 she starts her own affair with Philip Christoph von, hard last name, it sounds super Scandinavian. They're naturally very stupid, and their love letters get intercepted by Clara, Countess von Platen, who was Sophia's literal mistress-in-law, and Clara tells the whole royal family, who act like a mob and hire 4 dudes to kill Philip right outside of Sophia's apartment, in her line of sight. Then they took Sophia's kids away and told them to forget her existence. They imprison her at Alden House in Germany, and to save face, Sophia Dorothea is titled a duchess, allowing her to administrate over a small village, receiving dignitaries and other religious figures in her gilded cage, although she was only allowed to walk or ride on short bits of the road. It's said that the notorious hateful relationship between George I and his son George II was the cause of the disrespect towards his mother Sophia. She had died at Alden House in 1726, largely forgotten, and her legend would only resurface a few decades later due to a scandal that swirled around her great-granddaughter, Cataline Matilda of Great Britain, the sister of King George III. Now, the great-granddaughter, Queen of Tears. In 1766, at the age of 15, the daring and eccentric Catalina Matilda is married to cousin King Christian of Denmark, who suffered from being a massive insipid turd who grew up with untamed anger management and insecurities that made him into a deranged bully as an adult. Christian treated Caroline exactly how you would imagine from that description. He even delayed consummating their union for years, which is wildly unheard of. She traveled alone, no maids or family or rich folk stuff, to Denmark from England, and no one even told her he was a nutcase who would hate her. Yeah, no, by 1770, she was having her own affair with Johan Friedland Struensee, and the two lovers soon scandalized Europe by essentially taking over Denmark, issuing reforms and infuriating the nobility. Caroline Matilda was riding high, striding through the court in men's clothing, subverting the patriarchal codes of the day. In 772, Denmark's Queen Juliana Maria orchestrated a palace coup, and the increasingly tyrannical Johan is executed in April. Catalina Matilda is banished and disgraced. Her unacceptable conduct convinces her brother George that he could not welcome back this criminal sister into the English royal family. Ripped away from her children, she is sent to Celle Castle in Hanover, and like her great-grandmother, put under a sort of Gentile house arrest. Unlike her great-grandmother, she is allowed to walk through town, earning praise from commoners for her kindness and charity, because it doesn't count as a crime if he did it to himself. Most of the information we have about Crown Prince Sado, born in 1735, comes from the wife's autobiography, Queen Hayajian, written in 1805. She recalled what happened as his disease progressed. Prince Sado's mental health further deteriorated by 1757, following the death of the queen and his adopted grandmother. To release his emotions and frustrations, Sado began to beat the court eunuchs and staff. When that wasn't enough, he began to kill. Here's what his wife's account was of that. The first person he killed was Kim Hachia, the eunuch who happened to be on duty that day. The prince came in with the severed head and displayed it to the ladies in waiting. The bloody head, the first I ever saw, was simply a horrifying sight. As if he had to kill to release his rage, the prince harmed many ladies in waiting. I suffered so for this. His illness seeped deeper and deeper. Now that he was killing people, our quarters became a house of horrors, in which no one could be certain that they would not fall victim next. Eventually, Prince Sado kills his favorite mistress and threatens his own sister. In 1762, realizing the disgusting conduct would ruin the Korean family, his mother appealed to his father and they had to eliminate their own child. Since tradition dictated that his wife, Lady Hyajong, would have to die as well as their son if they punished Prince Sado, the king came up with a bizarre solution to safeguard the daughter-in-law and heir. On a sweltering day in July, the king forced Sado to step into a rice chest that would then be locked. So that way, technically, the disgraced prince had caused his own death. He died 8 days later. And I can't even give you a funny title for this one because it's just a lot. This is the Crop Top King. King Maha of Thailand, crowned in 2019, is a philandering train wreck hot mess. When his third wife dumped him, he tossed her parents in prison for 2.5 years for royal defamation. His earlier 2 marriages were equally rocky. He allegedly fathered 5 children with a mistress during his first marriage to his cousin, and then married said mistress. Later he dumped her and made her flee the country. When he was crowned prince, taking a page from Caligula, he appointed his pet poodle Fufu to the royal air chief marshal, then held 4 days of Buddhist funeral rites when the poodle died in 2015. He even took the pooch to a 2007 reception hosted by His Honor the US Ambassador Ralph Skip Boyce. Then there is the 70-year-old king's fondness for wearing crop tops and temporary tats. Check out this sick pic at an airport in Munich, strutting his stuff with a rolled up tank top, sagging jeans, and fake tattoos with the poodle in tow. Call this king a queen because he is serving! Belly-bearing bets have become the garment of choice for many young Thai pro-democracy protesters in rallies in recent years. They are looking to limit the powers of the king, who has become the richest monarch in the world, partly by amassing personal control of an estimated $43 billion in royal assets in 2018 that were historically overseen by an agency meant to manage the money for the benefit of the Thai people. His response for this was to ban crop tops. In July 2019, 2 months after the king married his 4th wife, his longtime mistress Siniat was made a royal consort in hopes of getting her to shut up and accept that he'd never marry her and make her queen. 2 months later, because this didn't work, he strips her of her titles, tosses her in jail until she can learn to behave, and after 10 months, she's released back to his custody for about 2,000 explicit images of them to get leaked to the entirety of the Thai community in a cyber attack, and everyone sees these guys. They're explicit. Obviously, I could keep talking about this guy and his gross scandals forever. There's no shortage of them, but instead, we'll stare at these airport photos again because man, what the hell am I seeing here? Starting off with a classic, the Coburg-Kohari curse. One of the German branches of Queen Victoria's family were the Coburgs, who were famously cursed with more than hemophilia. Hungarian noble Antoinette de Kohari married into the family in 1815, and the bride's father persuaded the emperor to assign Antoinette the legal status of a man, allowing her to inherit his estates and whole fortune that wouldn't have gone to anyone in the male line. A monk named Brother Amerskius was one of the super distant male relatives outraged at losing potential inheritance, so the brat cursed her. The hardest hit was the royal house of Portugal and the Kohari branch of the Saxon-Coburg family. Her son Ferdinand's wife dies in labor. Then Maria's successor Pedro lost his wife as well. Pedro then passes away, and a week before one of his brothers had died, then a week after Ferdinand, his other brother dies. Within 8 years, 5 members of this family are dead. Even Pedro's successor is plagued with misfortune, as are his children and Pedro's children. This whole family is killed in coups and inside jobs and tragic illness, right up to Prince Leopold in 1916, who pushes his lover to the edge, causing both of their deaths. The talk of the tabloids, Grimaldi witch curse. There are a couple different versions of the reason for the curse. Prince Rainier I abducted a Flemish woman who escaped, or she was a witch being burned at the stake by him. Whoever it was, they got revenge with the curse. Never will a Grimaldi find happiness in marriage. Prince Rainier III's father was gay and ended an unhappy marriage after 10 years to announce it. And while Grace Kelly and the prince were sold to the public as a great love story, the truth was he cheated on her a whole bunch before she passed in the 1982 car crash. Her daughter Stephanie, who survived the incident, endured several failed relationships, and Grace's other daughter Caroline had a tumultuous love life. With a divorce, her second husband who died in a speedboat accident, and her third husband, a prince, she now divorced. Perhaps taking the curse seriously, the current reigning Prince Albert III put off marriage for a long time, instead having a bunch of illegitimate children with various women before marrying Charlene Whitstock in 2011. It was super bumpy, seeing as she found out about some love children, called it off, and then he persuaded her not to. She could be seen crying throughout all of her wedding footage. It followed through the lineage until it started a war. Caroline's curse. May heaven and hell blast your happiness. May your family be exterminated. May you be smitten in the person of those you love best. May your children be brought to ruin and your life wrecked. And yet may you live on lonely, unbroken, horrible grief to tremble when you recall the name of Caroline. Yikes. That's the curse placed on the Habsburgs after Caroline's son was executed for being part of the Hungarian uprising. In 1853, Habsburg Emperor had to dodge attempts on his life, but he found love with Bavarian Princess Elizabeth. They lose one daughter to illness before Elizabeth herself passes after birthing their son. Archduke Maximilian, heir to throne, is sent over to rule Mexico, where he's beheaded by Mexicans and his wife sent to an asylum. The hopes of the emperor now became centered on the crown prince, who married Belgian Princess Stephanie despite being in love with Baroness Marie Vesteria. They're notoriously found dead in a hunting lodge in 1889, and it's ruled they've taken their own lives with no investigation ever done. The case is still known in Austria as the Mayerling mystery. I could keep going through generations of this curse, but I'll say it hits its crescendo with the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and we all know what happens and what started that. Next up, the prophecy as promised. Amamalama placed a curse on the Raja Wadiyar of the Mysore kingdom in the early 15th century when he came to take her husband's throne. She had fled, taking her jewels to the nearby town of Talakadu, and when the officials came to apprehend her, she spoke a three-part curse before jumping into the Kaveri River to end her own life. The curse commanded Talakadu become a barren expanse of sand, and for the Malagangi, a village nearby the river, to turn into an unfathomable whirlpool. And she condemned the kings of Wayadar's family to not have any children for eternity. While the events don't play out exactly as she demanded, they came eerily close. Talakadu became a desert-like place. The river near Malagangi commonly sees whirlpools, and the Wadiyar family has only birthed male children in an alternative generation, which makes it difficult for kings to have direct heirs. Historian Dr. A. Verarapa explains that if we take a scientific view, there's no scope for a curse. But if you observe the Wadiyar family tree, 6 rulers since the 17th century have been adopted sons or nephews. The Wadiyars have too acknowledged this fact. But has the curse finally been broken? In 2017, India TV reports the current ruler, himself one of these adopted sons, and his wife welcomed the first Wadiyar baby in 54 years. It's one we all know, and we can probably sing, "Rah rah Rasputin warned them." The Romanovs were the last royal family ruling of the Russian Empire, and they had ruled the country for 400 years. Obviously, by the 20th century, it's about time for some change, and the Romanov dynasty was facing some serious challenges. I mean, we got World War I raging, famine and war-stoked aggression groups, and the Romanovs' only son, Alexei, was the sole heir and had hemophilia, which was a huge issue then. But Rasputin was able to keep the boy from dying on 5 separate occasions. Needless to say, from the perspective of the Romanovs, Rasputin was the only thing keeping the dynasty and empire alive single-handedly. Rasputin, however, issued a prophecy early in his life, before he even met the Romanovs. A vision that if someone killed him, their entire family would die with him at the hands of the Russian people. He made sure to be a broken record about this too. Well, his warning failed to discourage Felix Yusupov, who poisoned, jabbed, pew-pewed, and strangled, then drowned Raspy. And Felix was the cousin of the Tsar Nicholas of Romanov dynasty. Just like that, Rasputin's death was the end of the Romanovs, as just a few months later, the Russian Revolution swept the monarchy out of power, executing all of them and making Rasputin's prophecy come true. Now for the legal obligation to be taken to the grave. Working for the pharaoh could be pretty lit as long as it wasn't forced captivity. If you were hired staff for arts, music, foods, hygiene, whatever, you'd be paid spectacularly, housed and fed well. Overall, you had a good go of it. Until there comes a day where every pharaoh gets mauled by a hippo and has to take a dust nap. Because of their strong belief in the afterlife, Egyptians were dedicated to ensuring that they carried the things they would need into said afterlife. Tools, cooking utensils, makeup, a brush, a long narrow glass bottle filled with buzzing bees. I see you, Cleopatra. In the case of pharaohs, who were considered to be the most important people alive, they required their workers, enslaved or contracted, in their afterlife if they were to continue living lives of comfort and luxury even after death. Many other individuals of high rank in ancient Egypt who had staffing would also often be buried with their workers, the same as pharaohs, treated as if they were moving into a new house with their masters. And this was the rules. You were a servant, you were expected to go quietly, willingly. Hell, they wanted you to be so excited you practically threw yourself in the tomb and begged them to bury you in. Before any of the pharaohs that are the most famous today came into power, however, the tradition underwent a change. Obviously, burying people in there is pretty cruel, and after a while people got real sick of having to die when the pharaoh does. However, the pharaoh still requires servants in the afterlife to perform various menial tasks for them and maintain their palace. This led to the introduction of shabti, tiny carved figures that were placed within the tombs of the pharaohs. They're shaped like small mummies, and each of them had special details carved into them on what jobs and tasks they would have in the afterlife. Imagine pointing at a fish and going, "Hey, look, a fish," and its response is, "That is Lord Fish" to you. Quite the case with carp, of all creature, literally the dirtiest little bottom feeders there are. They eat just about anything, thus earning their meme status as a garbage fish. However, carp, like koi, can be fortunate and seen as good luck. In fact, talking about carp the way I just did could get you in massive trouble during the Tang Dynasty, because carp has the same pronunciation as the Tang Emperor's last name, Li. According to the Miscellanea of Yuyang, which is a record of legends, folk customs, and herbal remedies in the Tang Dynasty, carp had to be referred to as Lord Red Carp to show respect to the imperial family. Also, those who happen to catch carp should relieve the fish immediately. It's not acceptable to eat them, and those who sell them will be flogged 60 times. However, like all legal provisions, this law was only as good as its enforcement, and judging by the amount of Tang poets who wrote about catching and eating carp without any record of punishment, seems like this law was very loose. Emperor Renzong of the Yuan Dynasty had a similar idea as his Tang predecessors. The Yuan Dynasty historian Yang Yu recorded in historical notes that during the Renzong reign, people in the capital were not allowed to hold chickens upside down. Offenders would be convicted, probably because the emperor's zodiac sign was a chicken. Now, it's China's shorty selection system in the Forbidden City. Inside the Forbidden City, most women were maids and servants, but there were the notorious concubines. Their task was to bear children to the emperor, as many as he could father, because that's what he was focusing on when walking into a harem of women who couldn't say no to him and were also the baddest biddies the empire had to offer. Anyways, women were selected for the court as early as the Jin Dynasty, and the aesthetic selection criteria did range from emperor to emperor. According to law, all young unmarried women went through the selection process. Only girls who were married or had a certified physical disability or physical deformity were exempt. Whenever selection time rolled around, the Board of Revenue sent notices to the officials in the capital and the provincial garrisons to enlist the help of the clan heads. The banner officials then submitted a list of all available females to the commander's headquarters, and they set the date. During the Qing Dynasty, girls were brought on the appointed day to the Shenwu Gate of the Forbidden City for inspection. They'd be accompanied by their parents, nearest relatives, together with their clan heads or local officials. Social background was actually no barrier, and many emperors chose concubines from the general public. The empress was the one exception. She had to be for a high-ranking official. Less than 100 candidates would be selected to spend the nights with women who specialize in training and managing maids. Candidates' bodies were inspected for infections, body hair, body odor. Think of that beginning scene in Mulan, as stereotypical as that is to say. They advanced through 2 more levels of concubine boot camp, weeding out the weak, America's Next Top Model style, and finally, the selected few would take their lives as easy-bake baby ovens. Womp womp. Next. Imagine someone wants to make sure you like the food, so they find a way to measure your enjoyment. Literally measure it. Like, get on a scale, big boy, it's time for your weigh-in. Absolutely crazy. So listen to this. According to a 2018 Grazia Daily article with the representative of British Windsor family, before and after Christmas dinner, everyone gets weighed. Ho ho ho, jolly occasion. The weird tradition apparently dates back to King Edward VII's reign in the early 1900s. His Majesty was apparently concerned about the people's health and whether or not they're eating well enough on Christmas. So, each person attending this dinner is required to get weighed on a pair of antique scales both before and after eating. If they gain in weight, it signals they truly enjoyed themselves at the table and the king did his job. Oh yeah, and you are obligated to know how much you weigh too before and after, so don't think you can ceiling stare your way through this one. The tradition was depicted in a scene in the 2021 film Spencer, in which Princess Diana, played by Kristen Stewart, understandably tweaks a little and expresses her distaste over the entire debacle. Pop off as usual, Princess D. Some other fun royal Christmas activities are the guests are expected to enter the room in order of seniority, whatever the hell that means, and wear paper hats even though the queen doesn't have to wear one. And last but not least, rules are meant to be broken. Like all monarchies, Spain does have its royal protocols, and they regulate the normal stuff, how you talk, walk, dress, the elegance in which you hold your regal frame. Spain has these royal protocols alright, and we know that because Queen Letizia is constantly making headlines for breaking them flagrantly and with a smirk ever since her husband was crowned. In 2014, royal watchers gasped when she wore a little black dress with a short skirt that was see-through all the way up to her mid-thigh. Conservative royals frowned that when she wore a sleeveless dress to a formal dinner. She wears pants and shorts and sweatpants. She forgoes traditional shawls and enormous hair cones for Brandy Melville and cute ponytails with highlights. Stylistically, the previously divorced commoner and formal journalist, which I have to add because you know that was hella drama when she was made queen, is basically the opposite of her mother-in-law, who's now Spain's former queen, Sofia. Letizia probably takes extra delight in flaunting their differences since the two hate each other with a passion and have gotten in shouting matches in public. Trust Letizia to put the queen in queen.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kind of difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampongate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nicky were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nicky's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchesne after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm and the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
Number 5. Princess Margaret's affairs. This isn't really much more than tabloid fluff, but this scandal was a massive pain for the entire royal family, and it was pretty clear that she couldn't care less. A whole bunch of dudes got involved in this, and it wasn't until I learned that it didn't involve Pete Townsend of The Who, but Pete Townsend of Who Cares, and guess what? Just like every single romantic relationship covered by the press, it sucked for everyone involved, but ultimately nothing all that interesting really happened at all. Number 4. Covering up Prince Andrew. It's mostly atrocities from here, so buckle up. I cannot say what was alleged to have happened with this case, but what I can say is that there's smoke, then there's fire. The entirety of Prince Andrew's existence has been one massive sham, and the fact that the royal family continues to deny knowledge of it in any way would be laughable if it weren't so teeth-grindingly frustrating. I do genuinely believe with all my heart that they knew, and they didn't do anything about it until it was going to get on their shoes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can dive down that rabbit hole yourself. You've got your rules, I've got mine. Number 3. Prince Philip. I have many words for Prince Philip. Words like good, which are immediately followed by riddance. Yeah, Elizabeth's husband was just about the least interested royal in even mildly disguising his attempt for anyone that wasn't a man, white, or as rich as he was. There are so many quotes, so many, they're all horrible. I don't want to say them here, I don't know if I can say them here. Like, there's taking the mask off, and then there's just being an absolute loser. I've heard dudes with the stars and bars tattooed under their breasts say the same things this mummy has said over the course of their equally worthless existences. Not to mention a similar proclivity in dating partners, as Philip and Elizabeth are cousins. Dude passed at 99, which was just about 99 years younger than he looked, and 99 older than he deserved. Number 2. The Bowes-Lyons. When Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were born as the cousins of Queen Elizabeth, they were said to have passed at birth. However, it was revealed that they'd in fact lived, but due to their classification as imbeciles, they were abandoned at Earlswood Hospital and their existence was hushed up completely. Seriously. No one went to their funerals, no one cared. The people that are the face of the country will abandon those they view as worthless for no better reason than to keep their image pure of mad blood. They were never visited, no one cared, and it isn't uncommon. JFK had a similar thing happen with his sister, except that was even hidden from him. These are your politicians, your rulers. Look at them go. Wow, look at them. Going all the way over there. And in at number 1, you kinda had to guess it, it's Diana. The entirety of this was a nightmare for everyone. More tabloid crap, a marriage that happened out of convenience, and the straight up mistreatment of a woman made public via dishonest journalistic methods, which was then immediately followed by her unbelievably tragic passing. But Diana was easily the only royal who actually tried to do something with the power she had. Even if it was lip service, just touching a victim of AIDS at the time was enough enough to change the minds of an entire public. She actually stood for something, but the royal family's image will never change, and it'll never have to.
The secret love child. Writer Mariel Daniels, then a 16-year-old working on a biography of the Belgian Queen Paola in 1999, casually discovered, the then reigning King Albert II fathered an illegitimate daughter during an affair that lasted 18 years. Casual stuff, you know. She was born Delphine Bowles in 1968, daughter of Baroness Sybil Delcilius Longchamps, and from an early age, Delphine did know who her biological father was. Albert, who she nicknamed Papillon, was a constant presence in her childhood, even taking her on holiday. Though apparently an open secret in royal circles and the reason for marital troubles between the king and the queen, the story only became publicly known in 1999. Delphine had been speaking with Albert her whole life up to this point, who then reassured her that it would just blow over. But then in 2001 his tone changed. He told Delphine he wasn't her father and broke off their contact, leaving her in a state of shock. She eventually launched a legal action to secure recognition in 2012, but it dragged on for years as Albert continued to deny paternity. But when he stepped down from the Belgian throne in 2013, he lost legal immunity, so off the court they went. And it was only in 2020, after court-mandated DNA tests proved irrefutably that the former monarch was the father of artist Delphine Bowles, Albert was finally forced to acknowledge he'd fathered a child out of wedlock 51 years prior. And when it comes to siblings, you know what a big deal it is to say, "I call dibs"? William the Conqueror, the first Norman king of England, had 4 sons. One died before him, but William split his kingdom between his remaining. Robert, who was given Normandy, and William, who was given the whole dang throne of England. That left the youngest Henry just cold hard cash. William consoled Henry with the prediction that he would one day amount to much more than either of his siblings, who proceeded to make his life hell, stealing from him and locking him away routinely. Then in 1100, William, the older brother, dies in a hunting accident. Henry didn't even bring the body back. I'm not kidding, he got on his horse and he went around and galloped to secure the royal treasury in Winchester before rushing to London, where he was crowned on the 5th of August 1100. He was king before Robert, returning in triumph from the First Crusade, even knew the crown should have been his. Robert attempted to take England for himself, but Henry beat him back, and then after a few years took Normandy too. Robert was captured and Henry kept him in prison for the rest of his life. Henry ruled for 35 years in total and lost his only heir to the sinking of the White Ship, causing a royal succession civil war called the Anarchy. And speaking of dysfunction, it's the crappy Castiles. Born 4th in line to the throne of her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, Juana was married off to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy at age 16. When a series of sibling deaths made her the heir apparent to Isabella's throne, her husband confined her, using her mother's death in an attempt to press his claim over Ferdinand's for the Castilian throne. Juana already experienced mental illness before this point, and the loss of her mother had been an aggravating factor. Being imprisoned? Yeah, that does not help. After Philip's death in 1506, already known to fly into jealous rages over her husband's mistresses, even reportedly going so far as to attack at least one. Honestly, same energy here, girl. Juana refused to part with her deceased husband's remains for a disturbingly long time and was said to have opened her husband's casket to embrace and kiss him. Juana's confinement continued for another decade after her father's regency until he died. Unfortunately, Juana's husband Philip had spread rumors about her madness when he was still alive, and her behavior after his death didn't help, so her son Charles, who became the Holy Roman Emperor, eventually took over for Juana as regent and then monarch. From then on, it was him who kept her imprisoned and created a fictional world to keep her isolated. No one actually knows if she was crazy or just experienced depression and lived in an era where men undermined her intelligence and constantly threw distressing BS her way. Next up is 2 sets of dirty duos. The extreme punishment of a perceived disgraced royal woman stretches back at bare minimum to, dawn of time. Yeah, we haven't had a lick of peace since men started making rules, to say the least. In 1314, the high-spirited Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, daughters-in-law to King Philip of France, were accused of having scandalous liaisons with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gaultier d'Aunay. According to historian Alison Weir, the notorious Queen Isabella of England was the gossip girl who outed her pretty careless sister-in-law's out-of-wedlock romps, which took place primarily in the Parisian tower called Tour de Nesle. Blanche and Marguerite both admitted to their adultery because it was that or death, so I mean, their erasure from public life was swift. They had their heads shaved and they were tossed in the rich white girl dungeon, which isn't that bad. Meanwhile, this is the one time in Western history where the men actually faced a pretty harsh adultery consequence, something usually found in every other area of the world. The brothers had their elephant elephant trunks and boys chopped off while they were awake and alive, and then their nether regions were thrown to dogs, which they had to watch the dogs eat before being brutally executed. Marguerite, technically Queen of France upon her husband's ascension to throne, died in 1315, and Blanche languished in captivity, whereabouts barely known, and died in 1326. Because old is in the name, Oldenburg dynasty, which began in ancient times, so they should probably rename it to Ancientburg. Apparently this lineage comes from the god Odin, according to myth, then more realistically the king of Jutes, and then the Saxons down to Wittgenstein, and the last king of the Saxons in 800 AD. After that, the house gets its name through Wittgenstein's eventual descendant Elimar I, Count of Oldenburg, who lived in the 12th century. His descendants reign over present-day Denmark and Norway, and until the 1970s they also ruled Greece. Prince Philip of Great Britain, the son of Prince Andrew of Greece, was a member of the House of Oldenburg, and this dynasty now rules the UK and its Commonwealth realms too, under his son Prince Charles and any of his heirs and successors. They're back for more. This time it's the Chinese dynasty, the Tangs. The Tang dynasty of China represents something of a golden age in the imperial Chinese history, characterized by proliferation of the art, economic development, and territorial expansion into Central Asia. It's remembered as one of the most prosperous and culturally influential eras in Chinese history. The Tang dynasty's capital of Chiang was one of the largest empires in world history, controlling from Eurasia to Korea in the east to Afghanistan in the west. The Tang encourage any and all people with talent, whatever their background and ethnicity, to come to Chiang and participate as working citizens. In the 7th century, the Tang dynasty introduced the Tang Code, a revised penal system governing China's laws and punishments. It was a complex code informed by Confucian principles and rationalism. With it, the Tang court abolished certain forms of cruel corporal punishment, reserving death for only extremes. There were 3 key departments of the civil service, along with 6 ministries managing revenue, rights, personnel, defense, justice, and infrastructure. And fun fact, Li Yuan, who started as a commander of the tyrannical Su Empire, turned around to revolt with the help of his daughter. She led an army of 70,000 and captured the cities before joining her father at Chiang, one of the few female generals in history, let alone China's history. The two of them created the Tang dynasty. This was also the only dynasty to have a female emperor, Wu Zetian, and under her reign the army successfully conquered Central Asia and added much more territory to the empire. A dynasty that ruled the Russian territories for over 700 years, the Ruriks. The Rurik dynasty gets its name from the Viking chieftain named Rurik, who in 862 AD founded the town Novgorod, one day to be Kievan Rus. Rurik was succeeded by his young son Igor, who was too young to rule, so Rurik's kinsman Oleg ruled until Igor came of age. Igor ruled a short while before being killed, but at his young age he'd already produced an heir, Sviatoslav. Svia waged war for most of his rule. After his early death, his 3 sons duke it out with each other, and one survives to be king, Vladimir the Great, who consolidated the state of Kievan Rus to include modern-day Baltic Sea region, including Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Vladimir's son, Yaroslav the Wise, brought the state to its zenith in culture and military importance and laid the foundation for the crucial code of law for the state. However, after his death, the Rurik dynasty split into 3 princely cadet branches, the heads of each styling themselves as grand princes. From that point on, Kievan Rus was essentially a loosely formed state, and the Rurik dynasty broke up into sub-dynasties, each one ruling a distinct principality, claiming to the descent of Rurik the Old. And just as it often happens with large and successful ruling dynasties, the line of Rurik becomes hazy and muddled after a while. With the formation of principles and sub-branches, the family tree of the Ruriks grew complex and vast. Nevertheless, the Rurik dynasty would remain in power until 1610 AD, boasting a total of 21 male line generations. We can't talk about the most powerful dynasties without bringing up the longest one, the Imperial House of Japan. According to historical chronicles in ancient Japan, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, the sun goddess Amaterasu Omikami presented imperial regalia to her grandson Nagini no Mikoto. He in return passed them on to his descendants, the emperors, the first of whom was Emperor Jimmu in 660 BC. After Emperor Jimmu, there was a succession of sons that inherited the title from their fathers, but very little is known about most of them until Emperor Sujin, who was on the throne from 97 BC to 30 BC. And this emperor was the first to have more serious administration of the country by having a census and improving tax systems. Some emperors that came after him didn't have any children, like the 22nd emperor. In this case, the emperor would name sons or grandsons of brothers or uncles as heirs, so the lineage would continue. The emperor was thought to possess magical powers, therefore considered beneath him to be involved in the day-to-day running of the country. This was left to the ministers and advisors until Emperor Tenji, then followed by Prince Shotoku of the Nara period, creating the first constitution. From the moment Japan became more organized in the 6th century, the imperial family and court have played important roles in Japanese politics. A period of unrest started with the law of the sword above anything else, and this violent period only ended in the Tokugawa clan establishing a new shogunate in the Edo in the early 17th century. As the name implies, the Meiji Restoration was a time during which the emperor was restored to his former glory. Japan started branching out quickly to catch up with the West and protect its interests in the region, and it's modernized its industries. And ending us off today is the Medici dynasty. Famously the wealthiest family of Europe, they controlled Florence and made it prosper, funding its arts and development. They were bankers by trades, benevolent despots by design, and cultural influencers. The family produced 3 popes, 2 queens, and many Florentine rulers, ruling from the 13th into the 17th century. The Medici family commissioned virtually all of Florence's breathtaking art and architecture. Works by Brunelleschi, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Donatello, Fra Angelico. Giovanni de' Medici is the first Medici, a rags to riches type, working his ass off and also marrying above his social class, so he used that dowry given to make a risky investment in textiles. Pays off, and so he started the Medici Bank. By 1420 he's the wealthiest man in Florence, using it to kick off Florence's prominence in the arts during the early Renaissance period. His firstborn son Cosimo ruled Florence from his workshop behind the scenes, passing a yay or a nay on proposed government laws from his study. Over 37 years, Cosimo created a dynasty that would endure centuries and produced 4 popes, one of them his own kids. The last Medici, Anna Maria de Luisa de' Medici, died in 1743. The Medici line was then extinct, but the legacy of the family lived on. Anna bequeathed the Medici treasures, the family's entire artistic patrimony, to the people of Florence. The only condition is that none of it can be sold or gifted to other countries. Thank God, because we know the Museum of Stolen Items, oh my bad, I mean the Royal British Museum, would have taken those in a second.
Alright, so the Cambyses are up first. Cambyses was the son of Cyrus I and the successor of his father in Anshan as the king of Agistius of Media. According to the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses married a daughter of Astidius, by whom he became the father of Cyrus II. Cambyses II, aka Cyrus II, performed the ritual duties of the Babylonian king at the important New Year festival of 538 and of 530. Before Cyrus set out on his last campaign, he was appointed the regent in Babylon. That campaign was the conquest of Egypt, planned by Cyrus, and was a major achievement of Cambyses' reign once captured. This is the lunatic who liked to torture animals for entertainment and notoriously killed the Apis bull to torment the Greeks who worshipped it. Cambyses was traveling through Syria on his way back to Persia when he first heard reports of a revolt there, and then he died mysteriously in Syria in the summer of 522, either by his own hand or as the result of an accident. This is one of the few Persian families to have held the throne, the Xerxes line. First we have the granddaddy Xerxes I, or the Great as titled by the 5th Persian king. He was the son of Darius the Great, and his reign lasted from 486 BC to 465 BC. He's well known in history for his attempted invasion of Greece and how later in the same year he was defeated in the Battle of Salamis, which led him to flee his own kingdom. He's known as both a Persian ruler and a pharaoh, as when he ruled Egypt it was also part of the Persian Empire. Little is known about the last years of Xerxes' life. After his reversal in Greece, he withdrew into himself and allowed himself to be drawn into his harem intrigues, in which he was in fact only a pawn. Thus he disposed of his brother's entire family at the demand of the queen. He was assassinated by his own commander of the royal bodyguard forces. Another son, Artaxerxes I, succeeded in retaining power. Artaxerxes I was given the throne by the commander of the guard, Artabanus, who had killed Xerxes. It's fine though, cause Xerxes Jr. got his daddy's lick back when he kills Arta about a month later. His reign, though generally peaceful, was disturbed by several insurrections, the first of which was the revolt of his brother. During his reign, Artaxerxes completed the Hall of 100 Columns at Persepolis, rebuilt the palace of Darius I at Susa after a fire, and Artaxerxes died of natural causes in 424 BCE, having ensured a peaceful succession by naming Xerxes II his legitimate heir. Xerxes II reigned for only a little over a month, however, before he was assassinated. Next is the Dossier line. Starting with Dossier from the Second Kingdom, Egypt's 3rd dynasty. He undertook the construction of the earliest important stone buildings in Egypt. His reign, which probably lasted 19 years, was marked by great technological innovation in the use of stone architecture. The innovative structure was a departure from the traditional use of mud bricks alongside stone. The greatest advance, however, was the completion of alteration of the shape of a monument from a flat-topped rectangular structure known as a mastaba to a 6-stepped pyramid. This great character built the famous pyramid and set up the construction mechanisms of large buildings, paving the way for successors of their kingdom for even more daring constructions. The Pyramid of Dossier is the first pyramid in history of ancient Egypt and therefore potentially all of humanity. It is a degree pyramid that is at the center of a funerary complex of great importance. It's located in the necropolis of Saqqara. Sekhmet is probably the brother or eldest son of King Dossier. Little is known about this king since he ruled for only a few years. However, he erected a step pyramid at Saqqara and left behind a well-known rock inscription at the Wadi Makhara. No Pep in his servant steps for sure, it's Pepi. So, Pepi the First kills the game. He does a great job ruling Egypt. He initiated the policy of intensive penetration of Nubia, south of the First Nile Cataract. Inscriptions record journeys southward early in his reign, and fragments of vessels bearing the king's name were excavated in Karma. Meanwhile, Pepi II is the longest running Egyptian monarch, surviving 94 years on the throne. He's also believed to be the youngest ruler ever in Egyptian history. Pepi II was the son of Pepe I, obviously, and was born late into his father's reign. While he was still very young, he succeeded his half-brother Merene, who died at an early age. His mother served as regent for a number of years, and the old group of officials serving the royal family maintained the kingdom's stability. During the first half of his rule, he brought prosperity and grandeur to Egypt. Second half? Nowhere close. You see a sharp decline of the old kingdom as economic disarray is caused by him virtually having no oversight. Powerful provincial nobles drew talent away from the capital, and because of the unusually long reign of the king, Egypt had a senile ruler when it needed vigorous leadership. Those of Pepi's children who survived him had brief ephemeral reigns and failed to cope with the political and economic crisis that arose as the 6th dynasty ended. His tomb may be more famous than he is. Menkaures. His tomb, the Pyramid of Menkaure, is one of 3 pyramids of Giza, alongside his statue triads that show the king together with his wives and various deities. It's the smallest of the 3 main pyramids of Giza, just 62 meters tall, but has one of the most complex and best preserved structures. He had 2 wives, both are his sisters naturally, and they didn't have much luck with sons at first. 3 in total and 1 daughter. At his death, his successor, his son, Shafashkek, completed the stonework walls of the mortuary temple in brick. Menaku was not succeeded by his eldest son, who actually predeceased him, but rather by Shepsake, a younger son. Shepsake built a monumental mastaba at the South Accra and was the only kingdom ruler to not build a pyramid. This family's work, especially the Great Pyramids, show a great mastery of monumental stoneworking. Individual blocks were large or colossal and were extremely accurately fitted.
In our number 5 spot today we have Marie Antoinette. In 1783, an artist painted a portrait of Marie Antoinette. This would go on to become one of the most scandalous royal portraits of all time because of the dress that she was wearing. The dress, a gaulle, wasn't the regular restrictive court dress, and instead was something that the queen would normally wear as she strolled around the grounds of Versailles privately. This comfortable dress, however, was a little bit too scandalous for the public at the time because it resembles a form of undergarment worn to protect expensive clothing. Basically, to the public, it looked like the queen had just been painted in her underwear. Not only were people upset that she didn't upkeep this sort of mystique of luxury and royalty, but the fabric the gown was made from was also quite controversial. The cotton dress was heavily associated with the slave trade and was looked on as a British fabric, which was horrible for a French queen to be wearing. The painting was quickly taken down, but the damage was already done. Within the next decade, the queen would meet her demise at the hands of the guillotine. In our number 4 spot today, we have Atahualpa and Huascar. These two were the 2 sons of the Inca king, but when he passed passed away in 1527, the kingdom was left to the sons, but their joint rule did not turn out so well. By 1529, war had broken out and things were going downhill. What would later become known as the War of the Two Brothers saw many horrors, and apparently one brother at one point made a drinking cup out of the skull of one of the other brother's generals. The civil war that the two started would definitely speed up the downfall of the civilization, but things met an even crazier end. Just as Atahualpa seemed close to declaring his victory in 1532, Francisco Pizarro's Spanish conquistadors showed up and captured him to hold him for ransom. During this time, he was still able to get out a message to execute his brother. In the end, while he outlived his brother, it wouldn't be by much because he was then executed by the Spanish in 1533. In our number 3 spot today, we have Richard III. There are many questions surrounding this king's rise to power because, well, it seems sketchy at best. When King Edward IV died in 1483, he left behind 2 sons. The eldest of the two, Edward V, was too young to rule on his own, so the sons were to be looked after and to be advised by Richard III, the late king's brother. Well, something strange happened after just 68 days when the sons were sent to the Tower of London and then were never heard from again. Of course, this meant that Richard III needed to take over the throne. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the sons, as they have never been found. Was this just a tragic coincidence, or is Richard III a usurper? Richard met his fate in battle just 2 years later and took these secrets with him to the grave. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Wanli Emperor. The 13th emperor of China's Ming dynasty, Wanli had many relations with women. He is said to have had 2 official consorts and a number of concubines, but one of these ladies was clearly his favorite, Lady Zheng. She had 2 sons, and one of them, Wanli, really wanted to be his successor. Unfortunately, this son was the 3rd of his children, so his ministers and those around him wouldn't allow it. They believed he wasn't the proper heir. In the end, the first son of Wanli, who was born to consort Lady Wang, was declared the crown prince. This is when the emperor decided that since he didn't have his way, he was just gonna quit working. Prior to this entire dilemma, Wanli was looked upon as a great ruler. He worked hard and he handled the threats to the empire very quickly. This was all extremely contradictory to the final 20 years of his reign, where he apparently just started ignoring meetings and royal duties. This is why many historians actually place a lot of the blame for the downfall of the Ming dynasty in 1644 to this sort of passive-aggressive protest. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Joan of Kent. Joan of Kent lived during the 14th century in England, and she was known as being one of the most beautiful women in all of England. She was said to be quite loving, but it is also said that she had quite a whirlwind and controversial love life. So basically, Joan was only 12 when she had her first marriage. I know it's horrifying now, but this was the practice at the time, and she married a knight named Tom Holland. But when Tom went off to war, Joan was approached by another man, the son of the Earl of Salisbury, who asked for her hand in marriage. Despite the whole Tom situation, she said yes, because at the time there was no way for anyone to know who would be coming back from battle, and she just assumed that Tom had died. It was of course quite the shock to everyone when Tom ended up returning, very much alive, to find out about all of this. A legal battle followed, which Tom ended up winning, and him and Joan went on to raise 4 children. After his passing, however, Joan would go on to marry again, to the dismay of many people, but this time she married the son of King Edward III, and she went on to become the first Princess of Wales. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have King Henry VIII. We'll start off this list with some 1500s dating drama. I love it. The 4th wife of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves, was married to King Henry for 6 months. It was seen as quite strategic, actually. See, Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's duke, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein, famous painter, travel all the way to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like ancient Tinder. It's wild. This man compared portraits for a few days and then finally chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. He even compared her to a silver moon. I've never heard Taylor compare me to the silver moon, so it seems like he's gonna step his game up. So eventually a treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because when she arrived, she apparently looked nothing like the portrait. How horrible is that? It's 6 AM, you just met your new husband after traveling upriver by barge, and the dude has the audacity to say you don't resemble a Victorian painting. Awesome! He even tried to stop the wedding, but it was too late at that point, so they had to follow through. Imagine still having to follow through. On January 6, 1540, their marriage was official, but soon after Anne gladly accepted the divorce, then lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Historians believe that it was cancer. In our number 9 spot today we have King James. Before I dive into this one, guys, don't forget to hit that thumbs up if you're enjoying the video. It does really help us out. Not to be confused with LeBron James, this is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Quote, "Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood." First of all, why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century, a doctor would be like, "Ah yes, just a drop of ale and a witch's flick, you'll be well on your way." Like, bro, I have pneumonia, please help me. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV apparently just never took a bath, and his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by being in the same room as them. Even if he was in a room hours prior, but he would give you lice. Doesn't help that the guy had long hair. Guy's got Steven Tyler hair. It's like a lice lunchroom in here. Lice would emit off of this man. Margaret Tudor was married to King James IV. That must have sucked. So itchy. In our number 8 spot today we have King George V. When was the last time you saw a stamp? I haven't seen a stamp in months, but King George V, but he loved stamps. Maybe a bit too much. It was taking many hours out of his days, even when it shouldn't have been a priority at all. King George V continued to collect stamps during World War I. Everybody is trying to stay alive. George is just licking stamps in the library, adding them to collections. Like all collections, the king started at an early age, but in the end of his days, George had albums and albums and albums. So many stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. That's so many stamps. In 1905, George set an all-time stamp record. It was the most money ever spent on a stamp. The man dropped like 220,000 on one stamp. That's some Logan Paul shit. So naturally, he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather, the King of Philately. That's the official term for collecting stamps. Some stamp jargon for ya. There you go. Welcome to Bumblebee. We're learning. Smash that thumbs up. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552, he was known as a collector. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. A little more badass if you ask me. His castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep. He also collected human artifacts. So yeah, it's a bit odd, isn't it? Imagine having company, don't step in lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Cheers! King Rudolph II, he's quite important in history. He supported the scientific revolution quite a bit. He also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff too, besides the kidneys and kangaroo collections. In our number 6 spot today, we have King George IV. Voted as England's worst king by historians, let's do it! King George IV was too invested in his intimate conquests. He was focused on all the wrong stuff, and he was also just horrible about it. This king tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw tantrums if a crush wasn't interested, and sometimes he would threaten to end his own life if he didn't get their attention. Super creepy, because on top of the lengths he would go to just to get some time alone, he also kept some of their hair after the dirty deed was done. Yeah, he would ask everybody he slept with for a lock of their hair. Back then it was kinda common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair. Just envelopes of hair. The collection was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa. This insane collection is now in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want to feel sick.
Number 5. King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? Well, at one point Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France. Unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks. Number 4, Prince Charles the vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad. Number 3, shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again. Number 2, leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those. We love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana. Well, we've got more stuff. We've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama. There was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, you know, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boyd Jones on here a few times, the guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boyd Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, you know, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. All safe here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off, get out of there.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance, as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This basically all started when her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move, she would decide who she could see and who she could speak to, and Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother until she was queen. She couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 9 spot today, we have the royal affairs. There have been many rumors over the years about the royal family and their extramarital affairs. Okay, I'm not saying it's a tradition, but it happens a lot, and I'm saying this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then, it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when the now king was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently, King Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when you're speaking to your wife, who you're cheating on. I don't know. Guess I'm just not royal enough to get it. In our number 8 spot today, we have pets. As we all know very well, image is everything for the royal family, and that is down to the finest, smallest detail, including pets. It is well known that the queen absolutely loved corgis, and how could we possibly blame her? Apparently, however, if a dog is not a corgi or a Labrador, it is socially looked down upon. Can't describe how insane that is. They're dogs. If you brought a dog who had just been rolling around in the mud everywhere with you, I could see why that wouldn't be as widely accepted among fancy social circles, but only giving the choice of a few random breeds seems kind of ridiculous. Apparently, Meghan Markle actually had to give up her beagle named Guy a few years ago before she joined the family, and then left it. I guess she can probably have whatever dog she wants now, so there's always an upside. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles I. Okay, this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I, right now we're on the 3rd, so we're taking it a couple back. King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War, and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which is certainly weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part of this, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's very weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building, because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. Okay, why'd we do the first part if we were gonna do the second? Could have just cut the middleman, you know? But instead, they cut his head off, okay? In our number 6 spot today, we have never travel in pairs. This is one travel rule that certainly makes sense, but it is really dark when you think about it. This rule is one that the British royal family, and honestly many people who can afford this sort of luxury safety, do nowadays. This tradition and rule is one that means that any heirs to the throne are not allowed to travel together. This is of course in case some sort of accident happens. Not every heir to the throne would be injured or perhaps killed. It's definitely very smart and sensible, but it has got to be grim, just constantly preparing for the worst thing to happen. It is of the utmost importance to the royal family that they preserve the line to the throne. Like I mentioned before, however, other people are now taking a page out of the royal book and are using this travel rule where possible.
Number 5 may have not gone mad, but it was her favorite emotion, Empress Anna of Russia. She is remembered as a horrible and spiteful child with a cruelty streak. Young Anna was reported to be mannerless and vulgar. So when her father, who experienced a stroke shortly after her birth that left him handicapped, passed away, her very traditional mother attempted to raise her in classic elements of strict religious femininity, so she may be a quiet and obedient woman. Anna had other plans. She hunted animals, kept guns and swords, and terrorized other children as well as the commoners. This behavior was all a massive red flag for some of the crazy things she'd do later in life when granted power and the means. Anna's only husband ever was Frederick Williams, who at their reception indulged a little too heavy on alcohol and gave him a hangover so wicked that 3 days later he just died. In 1730, her uncle Peter the Great passed. The Privy Council turned her into the Empress of all of Russia since she was widowed and childless, which was assumed to cause less trouble. The joke's on them because she turned around and immediately abolished the Supreme Privy Council and re-established the autocracy. Now, she had the sole power, and while she made some serious political waves, Anna also made some strange choices. She has a serious vendetta with Peter the Great's daughter Elizabeth, her cousin. Elizabeth was a better looking, younger, and also a rival for her throne. So she ruined her life. No nobleman could marry Elizabeth. If Elizabeth chose a commoner, the Empress would strip her of her titles and her claim to the throne. When Anna found out about Elizabeth's side piece, the unhinged Empress ordered her men to cut out his tongue and exiled him to Serbia. Anna even woke up one morning and decided to force Prince Mikhail to marry her lower-class older maid as a joke. After the ceremony wrapped up, Anna placed the prince, Mikhail, and the maid in a cage, dressed them as clowns, and paraded them on top of an elephant to an ice palace she had constructed for their honeymoon. In the extreme cold of Russia, she reportedly advised them to get to doing the dirty with each other if they wanted to keep their bodies warm enough to stay alive. Maria Eleonora wasn't the only queen who couldn't give up on a dead relationship, pun intended. Number 4 is Joanna of Castile. Never meant to be a princess, let alone a queen, Joanna earned her title and nickname Joanna la Loca through unfortunate means. She had 2 older siblings, Isabella, who passed in 1498, and Joan in 1497. Joanna's mother, the formidable Catholic monarch Isabella I of Castile, passed away in 1504. This left the throne of Castile and Leon to Joanna when her father passed in 1517. Joanna had started exhibiting signs of mental instability in 1504 when her mother had been sick. She was struggling to eat or sleep and having outbursts of anger. One such example was when she wished to go see her husband in Flanders. The journey would take her through France, which Castile were at war with at the time. When she was prevented from leaving for Flanders, 24-year-old Joanna flew into a rage. Perhaps one of Joanna's most notable displays of mental instability occurred when her husband died in 1506. Joanna refused to part with her deceased husband's remains for a disturbingly long time, reportedly opening the casket to kiss or embrace him. I'm seeing a pattern here with some of these women. While pregnant, Joanna traveled with her husband's body from Burgos to Granada, a distance of 668 kilometers, which would take around 6.5 hours to drive in a car today. And talk about a romantic imbalance. While she did all of this posthumously, when her husband Philip was alive, he talked Joanna's madness to anyone that would listen and completely discredited the woman. In 1509, Joanna was placed in the royal monastery/convent of Santa Clara in Tostillas, Castile, by her son Charles, who also forbade Joanna to have any visitors until her passing. The most recognizable name on our list is Marie Antoinette, who is number 3 in our countdown. Married at only 14, Marie was known to have lived an opulent lifestyle, but there was a lot of conspiracy and debate about the young woman. She was performing what she knew her royal duties to be, and she was known for not always being the most educated. She started the trend of riding donkeys and the worldwide trend of feathered/stuffed bird hats. She even once had an entire miniature village created with functioning shops so that she and other elites may dress like commoners and experience living lower status. Marie was misguided and young, but she was also the victim of an incredible smear campaign. She was accused of having ulterior motives constantly, supplying the Austrians with military plans or siphoning millions of livres of treasury money to Austria. It was the tales of sexual deviance that were the most damaging though, alleged to have had orgies, laid with commoners, or even have sex with her own ladies-in-waiting. Her most offensive accusal was thrown at her in trial before her famous decapitation, where she was accused of committing indiscretions with her own child, Louise Charles. With such a vast array of accusations against her, not one of which was supported by any concrete evidence, the trial was a formality, conceived merely as a step towards completing the revolution. Marie Antoinette was declared guilty and executed only hours later at the age of 37. Speaking of sexual deviance, meet Queen Anna Nzinga, who is number 2 in our countdown. Queen of what's now known as present-day Angola, Anna took the crown when her brother passed away. Being Queen of Angola was hard work. Anna managed to keep the Portuguese invaders out for over 40 years alone. So how would you, a tough and titanous queen, decompress? Why, by building a harem, of course. Anna collected the men she found to be the most attractive warriors in her region, keeping a harem of 50 to 60 men close at hand for whenever she, well, wanted to romp in the sack. Spending a great deal of her time strategizing around battlefield in men's apparel, some historians wonder if that's why she required the men in her harem to dress as women. Now, Anna didn't have time to deal with picking who she was going to sleep with every night, so she devised a unique system. Anna would just have the 2 men who desired her the most that evening fight to the death every night and then bed the winner. The next day, the winner still loses, as she would have them executed. Anna disbanded her harem at 75 when she took on her teenage husband, cementing her status as not only a serious badass who liberated her people and established dominance in an era of men, but also as a cougar. The next queen fought her way to the top of the countdown. Number 1 is Queen Rananavola the First. During her reign of Madagascar, Queen Rananavola the First is remembered as a dangerous tyrant who ruled her island nation with cruelty and an iron fist. Rananavola was a merciless to those who tried to colonize her nation, but also to those inhabiting it. Should crimes, disputes, or discourse arise, Rananavola had a nifty trick to solve it called trial by ordeal. Both parties would be forced to ingest 3 pieces of chicken skin alongside a poison taken from a native plant, Tanjana. Throw up your chicken skins and you're proclaimed innocent. Hooray! If you didn't, you were guilty and to be put to death, if the poison didn't kill you first. This trial was one of the punishments used in her persecution of Christian colonists, alongside throwing people into rock quarries and live dismemberments. Her horrific list really will go on. Rananavola was such a deadly tyrant that the queen managed to reduce her country's population from 5 million people in 1833 to 2.5 million in 1839, all through means of war, executions, religious persecution, or just settling scores. Depicted as a deranged tyrant even after her death in 1861, many have tried to repaint her image as one of a driven ruler trying to keep her culture and country independent from those trying to grow their own selfish empires.
Kiss the hand, which will be our first point. Believe it or not, kissing the hand, or feet, of a royal is a tradition that goes back to ancient times. Nowadays, the most remaining monarchies have tossed that tradition aside because, well, hygiene, it's annoying, people don't respect boundaries, and as a kid, nobody has ever liked that. Moroccan royalty, however, has hung on to the tradition. King Mohammed is a big old fan of this old-timely custom and has ensured it is legally mandated. Come across a royal on accident? Hand kiss. Having a meeting? Hand kiss. Why talk to the hand when you can give it a little smoochy smooch? Anyways, they did recently have to ban it for the duration of the pandemic to protect the king, obviously, but as of late 2022, the law is back. Hilariously, his son, like all little kids, hates the whole kissing thing. In 2016, a video went viral of Prince Moulay Hassan whipping his hand away and refusing to have a kiss as he went down a line of visiting dignitaries greeting them. His father found humor in it and widely joked the hand-kissing tradition will likely be retired with the prince. Imagine being so good at your job it becomes law that you're locked into it for life. The Bureau of Astronomy for Lifers. In ancient China, the emperor was known as the son of heaven, and society functioned off the concept that the emperor was God appointed. Naturally, the imperial government would regularly reinforce the idea of the emperor's divine right by using stories and symbolism that indicated heaven's pleasure at the emperor's leadership. The stories and symbolism came from astronomy, with the study equated to divining the future of the empire and its rulers. As of the Qin dynasty, their government had special departments specifically for celestial phenomena, drawing up calendars, producing advice, and evidence. When Zhu Yozong, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, came to power, he was not only so impressed with the astronomers and their predictions, but also the ability to see past the normal eye. Why, hell, he decided the rules were needed to control the Imperial Bureau of Astronomy. These men were practically prophetic, and this skill invaluable. What if someone stole it, or one of them wanted to quit and waste their brains on being a farmer instead? No, Zhu needed to make sure that under wraps and locked up for only the Son of Heaven's use. His rule bound all officials in the bureau to their posts, forbidding them from transferring to other departments, leaving for another position, or learning another position. And because it felt like it was such a supernatural skill, surely it must be in the lineage. So their descendants were also bound to astronomy and forbidden from engaging in other fields of work. They've got so little to talk about, it makes more sense to sit in silence. British royalty's list of permissible conversations has about as much flavor and depth as a boiled boiled chicken breast, which the whole family kind of already looks like they eat for 3 meals a day anyways. But more on the British family and their notoriously spiceless food later. According to the former butler of Prince Charles named Garreth Harold, the British royal family isn't supposed to discuss intercourse, religion, politics, or money, which are all incredibly relevant things for monarchs to be talking about. Literally all 4 of those things correlate with every facet of their title, job's existence, but okay, prudes. It's against royal etiquette to discuss these subjects between royals, commoners and royals, or even for commoners who are just at a royal event. Prince Charles was apparently a regular breaker of this rule, as proven in 2015 when The Guardian won the 10-year legal press for the release of the so-called Black Spider letters. The Queen herself has made many indirect references to political battles, and naturally, the media aired out Meghan Markle when she once whispered her approval on Ireland's vote to legalize the Big A for women. Instead, Grant said it's advised to discuss travel and the weather only. This has got to be the most boring family on earth, guys. I couldn't survive 2 minutes in that house. When you're royal, you have the pick of the litter, but not without consequence. Much like Queen Elizabeth in the UK, the Emperor of Japan, currently Naruhito, who took the throne in 2019 following the abdication of his father, Akihito, does not play an active role in politics for the country, more so a mouthpiece. However, they still follow some of the most wildly uptight rules imaginable, and one of them is how female members of the Japanese royal family are forbidden from marrying commoners. You can marry who you love, absolutely, but baby girl, should it be a commoner, you have to forfeit the princess status for them. Once known as Princess Nori, now Sayako Kuroda, she took this step in 2005 when she married her older brother's longtime school friend. Princess Mako became engaged to Kamarua, former classmate, in 2017 and addressed the press stating, "From the time I was a child, I was aware upon marrying I would give up my position as a member of the imperial household. Given that situation, I tried to assist the emperor and do whatever I could to fulfill my role as a member in the imperial household, while also valuing my own life." The two were wed in 2021 and Mako now works in New York City. Naturally, there are double standards. The same sacrifice was not required of Prince Akishino, the brother of Sayako, and when he married outside of the Japanese aristocracy. His wife is the daughter of a university professor. Ashiko's wife wasn't the first commoner woman to marry into the Japanese royal family, but she was the first from a middle-class background and was subsequently harassed and dragged through the mud. A royal family that says, hey, leave the dog out of this. Thailand had a pre-existing law that if you insult the members of the royal family in any kind of way, keep in mind it's the royals themselves that get to decide if you offended them, so you could really get in trouble for just like picking your nose near them. It could land you in prison. Each of the offenses is 15 years in prison too. And that trash talk can be in person, in writing, graffiti, or social media. Cue my example from 2015, a man named Thanakorn was charged by a military court for making a sarcastic internet post about Tongdang, aka Copper, the much-loved street dog that had been rescued by the king himself from an alley. In fact, she's so praised for her loyalty and obedience, Tongdang is a household name. The king wrote and illustrated a book about her in 2002, and an animated film in 2015 called Kong Tai Dong, an inspiration, was second in the box office that year. And this regular everyday dude, Thanakorn, understandably rolls his eyes hardcore and let the jokes fly in a social media post about said movie. I guess he didn't realize the dog counted as a royal family member, and he went to prison for 3 months. But others have gone to prison for decades as the injured magistrate convictions have surged since Thailand's arch-royalist generals seized power from the elected government in May of 2014. One man was jailed this year for 30 years for insulting monarchy on Facebook.
They were good, and then they were great, and then they were absolute trash. The Amenhotep. Alright, so on the top of the bucket we got Amen I. He's the great-great-granddaddy. He effectively extended Egypt's boundaries into Nubia. Next is great-granddaddy Amen II, who was an army leader with famous archery and battle skills. Supposedly he was able to shoot arrows straight through a thick of copper plates. His athletic ability was incredible, and he was known to have rowed a ship faster than 200 of Egypt's strongest navy men. Next is Granddaddy Amen III, who built himself endless monuments and temples. Perhaps his most famous construction was the Temple of Luxor in Thebes. This temple has become one of the grandest and most famous temples in Egypt. His diplomatic relations allowed art and culture to flourish, and his building projects are legendary. And then there's disastrous daddy Akhenaten, or Amen IV. This nutcase was obsessed with the sun god Atum and changed his name, appearance, politics, lifestyle, anything he could to feel closer to his lord. This pharaoh was so hated that Egyptians Egyptians themselves wiped his name from their history. He moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to Amarna and then renamed it in Egyptian to mean the horizon of Aten, and then ordered a new capital city be built there, moving an estimated 20,000 people over to make it. When he enforced monotheism, Og failed to realize that the temples of Egypt were the nation's socio-economic cultural hubs. It was the god priests that oversaw all of their industries, so without them, those pillars of the communities were just gone. And stripping these temples of authority, he caused Egypt's biggest reception. And then we've got the bottom of the bucket, we have our boy Tutankhamun, aka King Tut, who by his 3rd year changed his name to Tutankhamun and issued decree restoring temples, images, personnel, and privileges of the old gods to undo what his dad had done. He also began the protracted process of restoring the sacred shrines of Amun, which had been severely damaged during his father's rule. No prescription or persecution of Aten, though, Akhenaten's god, was undertaken, and royal vineyards and regiments of the army were still named after Aten. Tutankhamun unexpectedly died in his 19th year. Whatever the case, he died without designating an heir. This is another 4-part family tree. First, great-granddaddy Sneferu founds the 4th dynasty and marries the daughter of the last pharaoh of the 3rd empire, thus helped to solidify his possession as the pharaoh of the new dynasty, as well as secure Khufu's place in the line of succession. Meanwhile, his son, who becomes Granddaddy Khufu, pops out the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Apparently we were so impressed by this that we forgot to write anything else about him or why he did this, because we know very little about Khufu. We know he reigned 23 years between 2500 and 2566, and we know he married his sister. Shocker. Khufu traded for highly rare items, prizing both construction materials and precious materials like copper and turquoise, and so he developed the mining industry in Egypt. Limestone and granite were also quarried in vast amounts for rather large building projects that he was working on. Built over a period of 27 years, the Great Pyramid is undoubtedly Khufu's greatest legacy. Khufu's children include 9 sons and 6 daughters, including Defreya and Khafre, who would both become pharaohs following his death. When in power, his son Defreya moved 8 kilometers north of Giza and established a new necropolis on a higher leveled ground. Defreya's pyramid was quarried for its stone, and as such, there's very little of it left standing today. Meanwhile, the underson Khafre succeeded the short-lived Radifi and married his sister and 2 other queens who were probably his sisters. Best known for his pyramid, one of the 3 great pyramids of Giza, and also best known for the Sphinx, which bears his likeness on its face. And who else but the Ramses clan? The Ramses I gets the throne in a super uneventful way. He was friend and confidant to the former pharaoh who didn't have a single heir. Then Ramses spent all of his free time marrying all 4 of his daughters. Meanwhile, his son, Seti I, led a great army of 60,000 men and fought in many battles north of Palestine and Syria. King Ramesses II, son of Seti I, was able to finish his father's work by beating the Hittite army in Battle of Kadesh and creating the first documented peace treaty in history. Ramesses II went on to declare himself a god and rule Egypt for 67 years before dying of natural causes at 90, which is insane in an era where life expectancy was 30. But before getting to that ripe old age, Ramses spent any free time he had chasing anything with 2 feet and a heartbeat, enough to sire 100 to 200 children in his lifetime. He even outlived 12 of his own sons, leaving no heir. They're back again, the Ptolemies! People loved learning about this batch of literal bastards in the recent top 10 powerful families in history you didn't want to mess with video. Apparently y'all like when I'm doing tongue twisters. For those who don't know why this family could be a tongue twister, an important note is that they always recycled the family names. Men always named Ptolemy, and women always named Cleopatra or Berenice. They also happen to really take the old Egyptian ideology of royals only being with other royals a little too seriously. What's created is a massive family tree, one full of manipulation, contempt, scandal, and brash killings. While the Ptolemies started off strong, building the Library of Alexandria, compiled a star catalog and the earliest surviving table of trigonomic function, and establishing mathematically that an object is and its mirror image must make an equal angles to be a mirror. After the 4th, however, the family became like the Kardashians, talentless and messy. They took up everybody's time, but nobody stopped the free entertainment. So, like last time, let me limber up and I'll run us through some of the notorious BS. Ptolemy IV killed his mother, who had killed her husband, who was having a love affair with her mother, and then married his sister Arinso III, who was then later killed after Ptolemy IV died. Ptolemy XII annoyed his children so much, particularly his daughter Berenice IV, that they rebelled against him and drove him from Egypt. Berenice IV ruled briefly. She probably had her sister killed. She certainly had her husband strangled, who wasn't a family member. She was beheaded on the orders of her father. Ptolemy XII. Ptolemy XIV was the younger brother of Cleopatra VII, that's the Mark Antony one, and possibly poisoned by that same sister. Ptolemy VII was then killed by his uncle, the next Ptolemy VIII, at a wedding feast, or he may have been killed by his own father, Ptolemy IV. Scholars disagree. It's so messy, my mouth's so dry. Let's go on to the next one. Our favorite bearded lady was part of this family. It's the Thutmose line. Granddaddy Thutmose I became king after Amenhotep died without an heir. Probably one of the previous monarch's generals. He came to the throne around age 40 and is thought to have ruled for a little over 10 years. Historians have generally described Thutmose II as a frail and ineffectual, just the sort of person that a purposely shrewish Hatshepsut could push around. Public monuments, however, depict a dutiful Hatshepsut standing appropriately next to her husband. Wife to Tut II, Hatshepsut failed in the more important duty of producing a son. So when Thut II died young in 1497, yet again, the throne went to a harem child. Duly named Thutmose III, this child was destined to become one of the great warrior kings of Egypt. But at the time of his father's death, he was too young to take the rule. As widow, Hat became regent leader until Thut came of age. Within a few years, however, she proclaimed herself pharaoh, a vile absurd. And the 7 years past that point, she'd taken up cross-dressing imagery. Once depicted as slim and graceful queen, is now full-blown, flail and crook-wielding king with the broad, bare chest of a man and the pharaoh false beard, but also still long flowing hair and feminine features. Upon Hat's death in 1458, her stepson, then likely in his early 20s, finally ascended to the throne. Thutmose III was a skilled warrior who brought Egypt's empire to the zenith of its power by conquering all of Syria and crossing the Euphrates. Spoils from his many wars made Thutmose III the richest man in the world. His military accomplishments are recorded on the numerous monuments he built himself.
Number 10. Harry and Meghan. Most recent on this list, and honestly, this whole ordeal has been pretty interesting to watch. It's rare for people to willingly leave the royal family, but based on the interviews conducted with Oprah, it isn't hard to see why they did it. The primary reason for their leaving were related to false articles being generated due to their fame, and moreover, the royal family's unwillingness to aid them on the matter. But it was clear that this was a long time coming, as Harry was frequently subjected to neglect by his father, not to mention he was the child of a previous marriage, which we will talk about that later. Meghan, on the other hand, was subjected to extreme amounts of passive-aggressive racism, and the press piled on top of that likely became too much. As much of an anti-monarchist as I am, it's hard for me not to at least mildly sympathize and appreciate their leaving. Number 9. Prince Harry's Halloween. What isn't hard to sympathize with is Harry's taste in costumes being fairly poor. Dressing as a German World War II officer, which is bad for a bunch of reasons I can't say by name but you should already know, was a poor idea, and the public made sure that was known. Now, as much as it's fun to pretend that Harry was the only one screwing up here, we can't really do that, and we have to note that the stated theme of the costume party was colonials and natives. Yeah, it's pretty bad. William apparently did also attend that one as well, but I'm certain he didn't dress in anything that similarly demeaned victims of cultural and genetic erasure. Right? Yeah, look, it's nice that Harry left the family, but as long as he bears the blood of royals, he will profit off everything that was spilt in their name. Spare will probably be an interesting read though. Number 8. The Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. This is a historical channel, so I would like to grab a few times in which the royal family went through some historical troubles. Queen Elizabeth I is one of the most well-known British rulers in history. Her life has been extremely well documented, and she's also the possessor of an interesting title, the Virgin Queen. It is claimed that she had never been romantic with anyone, though this is hotly contested, as while it's clear that she very well did not have any official children and never officially married, these are the Tudors we are talking about. You know, there's no conclusive evidence that this ever occurred, of course, and that would become even more true as more of her reputation was based entirely on the notion that she was unwed. But dude, the Tudors, I mean, yeah. I doubt it. Number 7. Princess Anne's dog. The first member of the royal family to ever be convicted of a criminal offense, and it was this one. Yeah, see, Prince Anne liked dogs and decided on April 1st that she'd take her dogs out for a walk. Before we get into the details of this, I want to make something clear. Not all dog breeds are bad by default, though different breeds require different degrees of attention and care to ensure they're probably sociable. I have to be honest, but when you're a member of the royal family by blood, or leash, I imagine that people are going to have a hard time house training you. So it's no surprise that there were 2 bites that day as a result of the poor social training the dog had received. As a result, Princess Anne pled guilty to the charge under the Possession of Dangerous Dogs Act, which is a thing in the UK. Look, dogs are great. I'm a cat person. All animals need to be raised with attention and care. Same goes for people. It's pretty clear to me that the royals are equally as bad at doing both. Number 6. Edward VIII. Here is a historical doozy for you. Anyone remember the reign of King Edward VIII? No? Well, you probably blinked, because it only lasted 10 months. From the moment of his ascension, Ed Boy was clearly aiming for something weird. He was starting to get a little more open about politics, which is a big no-no in the royal family unless you're being racist, then it's okay. He also wanted the face that would end up on his coin to point in a different direction. These did actually get printed, but are super rare. He also wanted to marry a woman, but was told he couldn't, so he started getting a little annoyed and eventually abdicated the throne for love. Well, we're glad he moved on to better things, and there are no embarrassing photos of him meeting with certain people from certain countries prior to certain wars. None at all.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Christian VII. Christian. An ironic name for what I'm about to tell you. The young prince that couldn't keep his hands out of his pants. Let's mention him. Christian VII of Denmark. He was, as I said, a wee young lad, and of course a wee bit spoiled. Very comfortable with his body though, I'll say. More often than not, he would just have his hands in his pants. Middle of dinner, passing food around to his family, alternating hands in the pants to hands on food. This should have been number 1. Now that I think of it, what a little shit. It's unknown, but historians believe maybe he was a wee bit mad. Who's to tell? Either way, don't touch the rye bread, Christian. Thanks so much. In our number 4 spot today, we have King Henry VIII. Of course, we have to talk about Henry VIII. He's pretty bad. Henry VIII was the King of England from 1509 to 1547. He's been married a handful of times, and they all went south. When Henry married Catherine Howard, he was 49, and Catherine was a lot younger. Classic 1500s stuff. After the two were married, Henry was not the same as he was when they had met. He had since received a nasty jousting wound to the face, was gravely overweight, and never wanted to do anything with Catherine. So Catherine, of course, just wanting some shred of a life, and being, again, quite young, decided to look for love. Well, God forbid. God forbid you try and have a life in the 1500s. The young queen was accused of having an affair and was publicly and horribly taken out in the courtyard. She was accused of cheating before they even got married, and in turn, lost her head. Horrible times. In our number 3 spot today, we have Don Carlos. Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, the Spanish prince who just enjoyed being the worst human alive. Back in the mid-1500s, the eldest son to King Philip II of Spain was a horrible person. Now, it's been noted that he was born with a hunchback and one leg was shorter. Historians like to bring that up first, and how maybe he had the odds against him physically. That sucks on one hand, but it's how you deal with it and how you deal with others that shows what type of person you are, let alone leader. Don Carlos was made hero of the opera by his dad, Philip II of Spain, so right off the hop, easy promotion. All about who you know. Don Carlos would hurt people a lot. He would hurt animals for fun as well. As a true crime enthusiast, you know that's a red flag. According to historians, Don Carlos once made a cobbler eat a pair of boots because he didn't like how they looked. He made somebody eat a pair of boots. We're not going to feel bad for Don Carlos on Bumblebee today. No sir, he was set up to marry Elizabeth of Valios, the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided there's absolutely no way in hell, so she married his father instead, King Philip, in 1560. In 1564, a few brides were lined up for Don Carlos: Mary Queen of Scots, Margaret of Valios, and Anne of Austria. When Carlos was plotting to take out his own father, he was caught and imprisoned in solitary confinement until his death 6 months later. In our number 2 spot today, we have the personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst job to have or the best. Here we go. Royals have been sweating constantly about people trying to take them out. Taylor's mentioned Boy Jones on here a few times. That guy that stalked the queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boy Jones would go through the queen's drawers. Big ew. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate an attack, be as safe as you can be, like the kissing sheets for example. Have you ever heard about this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, and they also had a guy get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter. King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure his bed wasn't poisoned, so you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure that they weren't poisoned. Sleep tight, all safe here. Don't mind the bad breath on all of your pillows. You're safe though. Alright, time to clock out for the day. Clothes as well, that was touched. Maybe not kissed, but for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, no way I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off. In our number 1 spot today we have King Louis XIV. We gotta talk about perhaps one of the worst sights to see in the royal household. Back in the olden days, enemas were the talk of the town. Rather, the palace. Like most things in the 1400s, only the rich could afford the enema supplies, specifically King Louis XIV. Guy loved enemas. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. In just 1 year, Louis received 212 enemas. He would always take it a step further, and dare I say a step fancier, by using almond milk. Imagine being married to a guy and he pulls out the almond milk. Like, not again, Louis, come on. I just ate, man. No.
Let's start with the more familiar names and faces, such as the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a lineage that includes the first 5 emperors of Rome. The first being Emperor Augustus Caesar, aka Octavian, who founded the Roman Principate. He's also the one who beefed with his adopted dad's biological heir Mark Antony for said kingdom, and it unloaded all that Cleopatra, them taking their lives, snakes and swords drama. Tiberius comes next though, and he was one of the greatest Roman generals, but he was largely absent from running the state, preferring to leave the heavy lifting to the powerful men around him while doing horrific things on the privacy of his island Capri. Then Caligula, whose dad was poisoned by Tiberius, was a famous nutcase emperor and considered by many to be mentally insane for allegedly declaring war on the god of the sea Poseidon, appointing his horse military positions, and other overtly bizarre behavior. Then, when Praetorian guards smoke Caligula and his family, they appoint Claudius, who was the first emperor born outside of Italy, who completed the Roman annexation of Britain. Lastly was Nero, who committed, well, a lot of crimes, and took his own life. And after the death of Nero, Rome fell into disarray, as he had borne no son and their lineage collapsed. If you watch our channel, you know their name is on everything. The Habsburg dynasty was a family originally from Switzerland. These guys spread their legs to spread their dynasty, and they had multiple Holy Roman emperors. They were reigning in Austria for 6 centuries, and through marriages they were able to put the Habsburgs into power in the following kingdoms: Burgundy, Spain, Bohemia, and Hungary. And thanks to the habit of keeping it in the family, most of these guys were nuts. For example, Roman Emperor Leopold I loved to torture, and the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph was less interested in ruling than he was into turning himself into a wizard. Lest we forget the worst attempted peace treaty in history. After allying with their Austro-Hungarian Empire with Germany in World War I, the new Emperor Karl I secretly contacted France to secure a peace treaty, so his empire may not be divided after the war. This led the French Prime Minister to realize the Austro-Hungarians must be so weak that their armies would soon collapse, but rather than respond to Karl, he published his letter publicly, destroying the last traces of morale in the empire. The line of dynasty that ruled the imperial Spain and its colonies in the New World came to an abrupt end when Carlos II turned out to be a genetic basket case as a result of his family's intimate mixing. But there's like 90 more family members I could go through, and I got other stuff to do, so we're on to the next. A country known for the power of its dynasties gives us the Hans. When you Google the 10 most powerful dynasties in history, 8 out of the 10 results are dynasties of China. It is the first truly powerful family in China after the Qin, whose massive wars of conquest and vast construction projects killed almost half the population. Peasant Liu Bang is the lead of an army that ended the empire and began the Hans in 202 BC. The Han Empire had the longest duration of any empire, 2100 years of imperial rule, even when interrupted by a coup and split into 2 halves. They really shaped the economy and the culture of China more than any other lineage. They created institutions and economic policies. Its economy was more efficient than most empires at the time. The Han major export was silk, and they imported imported horses and glassware and precious metals, dominating the Silk Road. This was also the dynasty that brought paper to the world. Like most great empires, it started slipping after a few years. In the last decades, two emperors named Emperor Huan and Emperor Ling lived decadent lives. Slaying and fighting between rivals for power were common all over the empire, and as a result, a series of coups and revolts, the Han Empire quickly broke down as a series of warlords fought each other for control. One, Cao, he had possession of the young Emperor Xian and tried to unify China, but ultimately failed. After Cao died in 2020 CE, the Emperor Xian was forced to give up his position, officially ending the Han dynasty. Another famous name is the Capetian family. The House of Capet, as it's called, ruled France from 987 to 1328 as the senior-most line of the Capetian dynasty. Hugh Capet, King of France, starts what's the longest-running father-to-son succession line in history to date. An impressive 13 generations, spanning 330 years. The family itself already one of the oldest and largest royal houses in the world, repping names like the Windsors and the Habsburgs in their family, and the two Capetian monarchs are still running Spain and Luxembourg to this day. In total, their family has 38 French kings, 12 kings of Navarre, and 11 kings of Naples, 10 kings of Spain, and 9 kings of Portugal. Seeing as these guys are still going, I can't really say, oh well, this is when the last one died, now can I? Just gotta wait them out. Kidding. Or am I? Next, we all know about the spread of the Khans, but what about the Mongol dynasty itself? Obviously founded by Genghis, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous empire of all history. This man raised his way across Asia, well into the Ottoman Empire and the Egyptian lands, but never quite making it to full-blown all areas of Europe. Khan's descendants inherited and expanded his empire. It lasted for hundreds of years, and appeared they were the most powerful family in the world, as everyone feared the day they might show up at their door. The Mongols invaded in every direction, and most armies couldn't stand up to them at the time. They managed to create the Pax Monocalia, which allowed for trade, technology, and ideas to travel and flourish across Eurasia. This lineage was more powerful than all other dynasties at the time, but also notoriously more accepting of ethnic and religious differences. Just so long as you submit and follow our pretty chill laws, you could exist in peace. The dynasty lasted for 479 years, starting with Genghis Khan in 1206 and ending with the collapse of the Chatagi Khanate in 1687.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the black outfit. Another travel rule that the royal family must follow is in regards to an item that they have to bring with them on all trips, whether business or pleasure. It is pretty unusual to see the royal family dressed in black, despite when a specific occasion calls for it, but every time they travel, they're required to bring an all-black outfit with them. This is to prepare for the worst case scenario. If they are away on a trip and somebody important to them passes away, they need to ensure that they are ready with the appropriate clothing for when they're able to touch down on their home soil. This is of course very practical, but it's definitely kind of morbid. I mean, you're having to fuss over what you're gonna wear when you're actually just mourning the loss of someone close to you. It certainly wouldn't be the top of my list of things to focus on, but maybe that's why I'm not cut out for royalty. Okay. In our number 4 spot today, we have the rules of the road. Okay, this rule or tradition or law, I guess, is probably one of the craziest things I've ever heard, but I guess it's been around for quite a while and I just had no idea. As it turns out, the monarch is the only person in the UK who is allowed to drive without a legal license or even license plates. That's insane. I didn't expect the king to have to take a driver's test like everyone else, but just having a rule that allows them, if they chose to drive without any idea how? It's pretty bizarre. The good news is though, which makes this rule make a lot more sense, is that of course, rather than driving himself, King Charles' chauffeur will be much more responsible for most of the driving for the king. Let's just hope the chauffeur has their driver's license. I'm not gonna lie, there's this silly photo of the queen, and every time I think about the monarch driving without a license, I just think of this little photo. She's got a little silly grin on her face. She looks mischievous. And that's what I like to think, her just driving with no license. In our number 3 spot today, we have the armed forces. This is a tradition or system that comes into play when a new monarch comes into power. So last year this happened with the king after the passing of the queen. It is definitely one of the most intimidating parts of his new role, and this is that King Charles now becomes the head of the armed forces. This means that it is his responsibility and he is the only person who can declare when the country is at war and when the war is over. Of course, he won't be doing this this entirely alone. He needs to follow the advice and guidance of the government. The perhaps good news is that the new king has held quite close ties to the armed forces throughout his life, even spending time in the Royal Navy and taking flying instruction from the Royal Air Force during his second year at Cambridge University. Of course, the hope is that he won't have to be in a position to make these difficult decisions, but when or if he's faced with them, we can hope he makes the proper decisions for the country. In our number 2 spot today, we have no touching. There is a rule that you just cannot touch a royal. I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons for this, mostly to do with security, but aside from a very lucky handshake, you really are supposed to keep your distance. I suppose it's because I live the life of a regular person, but I kind of feel like in some ways this might be a little sad. I feel like you might be lacking in so much connection with a ton of interesting people, and like some of the people that you meet, wouldn't you just be dying to hug them? You know, apparently this is part of the reason why the Queen always wore gloves. She of course shook a lot of hands while making her royal appearances, and the same will likely go for the new king. Maybe he'll take up gloves as a fashion accessory, just like his mother. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the church. So we talked about the armed forces, and King Charles won't only be the head of the armed forces, but he will also become the head of the church in England. Quite a jump from talking about war and being the one who makes those kinds of decisions to being the head of the church, where things hopefully are quite the opposite. This is a post that British monarchs have held since the church was founded by King Henry VIII in the 1500s, and it appears as though the tradition will carry on. In this role, it means that King Charles will be responsible for appointing archbishops and bishops to their role. The king will of course be advised in this role by the Prime Minister, and it is said that the king is religious in his own right and that he has already spoken about how his personal faith has informed his approach to leadership.